right. Hello, everybody. My name is Josh, and welcome to the Through Their Eyes podcast. So, I'm super excited to be introducing this today. Real quick on my background, but I was previously one of the co-hosts for the podcast last year throughout a lot of like 2023 and 2024. And then I'm really, really excited to be welcomed by Unvi and Emily today to talk about our topic, which is going to be the adultification of childhood. So, I don't know if they want to introduce themselves again, and then we can kind of like get into the topic.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Unfi, and we'll be talking about, what Josh said, especially through internet and then also, societal things. But Emily, I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily and I'm one of your co-hosts here at Through Their Eyes. And to delve into the topic a little bit of the adultification of children, which is today's episode title, I think it's a really interesting topic, honestly. And I mean, we say that about all of our topics, but it's interesting in the sense that I feel like we're seeing sort of that evolution of children getting adultified through the internet because I feel like it's easier to put a magnifying glass on it when the entire world can actually observe it through this like shared like media because I think for a point in time we truly just allowed kids to be kids. And I know for me, like as I was growing up, I think that's really when we kind of saw that evolution of heightened adultification. Like that's when we started seeing it a lot more as opposed to the generation before me, because I'm older Gen Z. So but yeah, I feel like what's really interesting about the adultification of children is we kind of see that elimination of the tween category where there's that like division between being a preteen and well, I mean, there's that division between being a preteen and like an actual teen or being like a kid and a teen. Like there's that tween period, and that doesn't really exist anymore, which I think is really interesting. I think also we don't really give children that like space to be children um after those elementary years. Like when they're in middle school, it's sort of like that immediate jump from being a child to wanting to be an adult or wanting to be a young adult. And there's not really that intermediate period that we saw before. And like I said, I saw that a lot as I was growing up because I saw sort of like half of my classmates, like in fourth, fifth grade, sort of like still watching like Disney and doing stuff like that. And then the other half being on Musically, which is what TikTok used to be called. And like, yeah, it's just seeing that like stark divide growing up, I was just like, okay, like I think for me it was just normal. And now that I'm a little bit older, it's like so common that it's just like we see like preteens act older or dress older than they did before, which makes me sound like a mom, but it is true. And I was telling Anvi this the other day that when I was at the mall, I like saw a group of middle schoolers and they were literally dressed exactly like me. Mind you, I'm 21, they were like 11 or 12. So I was like, okay, whoa, this is crazy. But do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think like I have a younger sister and she's like 11, and I know a lot of her friends, they're like in fifth grade, fourth grade, and they're exactly like a high schooler. They have Lululemon, they have Uggs, they have the Brazilian Bum Bum Cream, they have Sol de Janeiro, they have all of these things, and they're just like completely removed from like childhood, I would say, mainly because I think it's, as we said and talked about before, internet access. Like my sister, she doesn't really watch Disney anymore. She doesn't really watch any of these like cartoons, like Cartoon Network or any of the shows. It's more of like brain rot and a bunch of I don't know, I guess things that you would watch as a teenager. And I know a few of her friends actually watch Euphoria. And then for you guys that don't know Euphoria, Euphoria is like insane. Like it's crazy. There's like drugs. There's like sexual themes. It's a crazy I guess, amalgamation of things I don't think, a fifth grader or fourth grader should watch. And it's like the adultification of children. I feel like it's also really tied into the fact that a lot of these kids, have unrestricted internet access, but that's also because their peers are also doing the same thing. And it's like peer pressure. Like for my sister, she wasn't into flared leggings, she wasn't into Uggs, she wasn't into any of these things. And then her friends were like, oh, I just got a new pair of Lulus, or oh my God, I got this new dress, da 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 da. And she's like, wait, I want that. So I feel like peer pressure is also a really big theme. But I don't know. What do you think, Josh?
Well, yeah, I think one thing I'll add on to it is kind of like the first thought that comes to mind for me, and I guess you like lightly reference to the brain rot, right? But just like social media in general, which is kind of like a go-to with these things. Like I remember when I was in like maybe like around middle school, I feel like that's when parents were talking about like, oh, kids are starting to get access to their phone at like these younger and younger ages. And then that gradually transformed into it being like, oh, now these kids who have access to their phones in like third and fourth grade are starting to use social media. And where it gets really complicated is because there's like such a blurred line, especially online and in social media now, where I feel like information that I guess like an 18-year-old makes can really quickly disseminate to like a 12-year-old. And I don't want to say that their intended audience is like necessarily younger audiences, but I feel like we're also seeing a lot now that people also like to make content that kind of caters to a younger audience because they're so much larger as well. Like the amount of kids that to an extent, like because they don't have this extra responsibility. And so when I kind of link it back to things, if you look even all the way to like the iPad kids like nowadays, it's like when the kid still has that much free time and lack of responsibility, and now their brain is constantly like stuck in this consumption mode where they're not out doing things that would allow them to like create their own philosophy about the world through like going outside or like actually experiencing it. Like very quickly, I feel like that information can disseminate. And so like Unvi, like you made a point too about like TV shows and stuff, which some of the stuff you said I thought was kind of crazy, like for from that age group. But even when we were like in elementary school, we'd see like a fourth grader with a phone and we thought that was crazy. And it's so gradual. And so I think where it like I kind of feel like it's taken it for me now is kind of this question of like, why do we, and I don't mean this because I feel one way or another, but like, why do you guys think it's a bad thing? Like, what do you think kids are losing? Like, what are they being deprived of because we're gradually leaning in this direction?
I think largely it's just the fact that it's developmentally inappropriate because for well, like lowered on me, but I was an elementary education major for my first semester of college. So I had to take some classes that talked about child development. And one really big theme in terms of sort of implementing what curriculum goes towards what age group is really relates largely to what's developmentally appropriate for a child. And a lot of reasons why health classes are reserved for children who are a little bit older is because of the fact that that's what's developmentally appropriate for them. Their bodies are changing, so they need to have access to that information. But children who are younger, they can't really conceptualize properly just because they're not at a point developmentally where they can fully understand the implications of all the information that they're intaking. So I think that's what the largest issue with this adultification is. It's just because a lot of times kids, they'll act in a way that's more mature, but they won't inherently understand the implications of their actions, what they're doing, or what they're even absorbing through the media. And that's also a really big issue because I think also, like, one example that I related back to is like me as a kid. I literally had like unrestricted internet access because my parents would work a lot. So literally like it was just me and my iPad. Like I was like the original iPad kid. Like it's not even funny. It's literally true. I was the original iPad kid. I got an iPad in second grade. I was like glued to it. It was bad. But my point is I remember as a kid I would watch a lot of horror movies just because I thought they were super fascinating. And now that I'm older, like I look back and I'm like, okay, I would just watch this because like I just, like, was I knew it was something, like, I wasn't allowed to technically, so I would just, like, watch it, and then, like, I realize now, like, I think I forgot what movie I watched, but I watched some old horror movie a few months ago, and I remember I watched it when I was really young, and I just remember, like, I was just like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I was watching this as a kid." And like, there were so many things that I picked up on that I genuinely just did not understand as a young child. And now I'm just like, "Okay, like, now that I'm actually an adult, I completely understand why there are certain ratings on certain things." Because at the end of the day, it's like, as much as a child can mimic an adult's actions, they will never truly be able to act like an adult internally. As much as they can externally mimic it internally, they don't really understand the complete implications of what they're doing or what they're internalizing, and they won't until they literally will reach that mature age. And it goes for anything, really. Like it goes beyond just like media. It goes even for like more mature life topics as well. Like kids, as much as they like want to act like an adult, it's like you will not be able to truly reach that form until you are at an appropriate age. And so Aside from that, I think, yeah, I think largely that's just what it is, the fact that it's just, like, developmentally inappropriate, and it also has a lot of negative effects on kids for them to be, absorbing, like, information or media that, like, what is it, is inappropriate for them at a specific age, like, it can have, like, effects on them later on. It also depends on the type of, like, media that they're absorbing as well, because I know with a lot of kids, they probably were playing, like, COD when they were younger than they probably should have. Like, things like that, I feel like that might be a different situation, but, I don't know, I think really it relates on the specific type of content that they're, like, that they're, like, watching that will, like that determines, like, what type of effects it has on them later on. But what do you guys think?
Honestly, yeah. I was gonna also say, like, socialization is such a big problem. Like, my sister just knocked at my door. She knew for a fact that I had the podcast going on, but even then, she knocked at my door regardless. And I feel like it's because they don't have any socialization context at all. They're always on their iPads, they're always on their phones, they're always caught up in their own bubble. That it's really hard for them to pick up on social cues and pick up on certain things that are really important just to function in society. And it's also like I've noticed a lot of people they tend to be more they disregard certain people's boundaries and they disregard certain people's thoughts and whatnot, especially like in youth. Like for example, I was in Iceland a while ago, and this isn't just an American thing; it's also just youth all around. So there were these two little boys, and then they came up, and then they were like saying a bunch of racist things, and I was like, "Wow, you guys really don't have any socialization skills, do you?" Because they didn't know how to react in certain situations. They didn't know how to pick up on certain social cues. And I really feel like it's because they're so isolated that it's going to be really detrimental for them to enter society and have to, pick up jobs and have to interact with people because they just lack those skills. And because of that, it's like, okay, that's the future of our country. And it's like, well, if that's the future of our country and then other countries as well, how are we going to progress and how are we going to continue to develop? That's just my take on it from like personal experience, but also what I've seen.
Yeah, and like even to I don't want this point to like take it away from the adultification element, right? But even like this like when you talk about like the way people socialize, like this I think there's like definitely an element of dissociation. Like you had mentioned those two boys, right? Or like those people that are making like these racist remarks. And like a huge element of that is like when you're exposed to this much content online, this kind of goes back to Emily's point too. I feel like probably the biggest detriment is that there's a certain rate at which like I think any child growing up naturally gains awareness about certain things around them in the world, and that's like can be maybe more correlated to their natural growth. But then they're being exposed to content that otherwise would have been withheld from them until they had like acquired that awareness. If that's making sense in this sort of way of like they think they know how to navigate or how to approach certain things that they really don't yet. Like they don't have that real experience yet. And so like even back to what you had mentioned with like I guess like these people making like certain remarks, for example. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought a little bit. But even back to what you had mentioned with these people making these certain remarks, I really do feel like a part of it is just because they think I guess like even when I was a kid, I got a little overconfident thinking I knew how to navigate certain social situations because like okay, I saw it in a YouTube video. I guess like we were watching like Dan TDM back then, and that was like my horror movies. So don't get caught watching like YouTube, right? But like genuinely, like from that perspective, I think yeah, that was just the main point I was trying to make. Kind of like this dissociation at like a social level. And so even when it goes back to the adultification of kids at childhood, I literally think there's like almost these two elements to us between like what we know and like from just like being consuming content online and then what we know from experiencing the real world and real interactions. And when you allow one of those to like develop so fast while the other one just lags behind, like you consume more and more of this adult content, but you really haven't actually acquired any physical life experiences that kind of are meant to relate to that stage of your life. I feel like that's what creates like such a disconnect in knowing how to navigate. But I get really concerned too, just like I don't like all the way back to COVID, right? Because I think that's when everyone was like chronically online the most. Like from there, it's just been like that dissociation. I still feel like I see the effects in like the way kids my age socialize and things like that. So that's really all I had to mention. Not really a question
I
there.
think the disconnect that you mentioned is really interesting because I think there's almost an aspect of it that's natural in development, and then I feel like there's also an aspect of it that's been worsened by what is it, children being naturally adultified or just by like this unrestricted internet access. I think there's a point in development where like kids genuinely like where they like see how adults acts and then they want to mimic that because they want to seem cool. Like that's just like a natural part of development. It always has been. But I think unrestricted internet access is something that's kind of made it worse. And because of that, we see I think like we see kids like sometimes like I think there's it kind of increases at least from my perspective, I feel like it could increase the like chance that kids will put themselves in unsafe situations or situations that they're just not ready for because they like want to like seem cool. Because I feel like I was saying, I feel like some level of that has always been like intrinsic for development, but I think it's just been worsened. And I feel like that isn't okay because it's like you don't want kids putting themselves in in certain situations because they want to seem cooler, they want to seem older, when realistically they're not, they shouldn't be in like said situations.
Yeah, definitely. Like taking Josh's point and then also Emily's point together, it's like they're growing up a lot quicker. Like one part is like lagging behind, the other part's like going way too fast. It's like, and the internet is like a catalyst for that. And it's also, they believe they know how to navigate the world and they want to appear cooler, as Emily said. And I feel like a lot of those things kind of just are like, when they're put together, it's like these kids just don't know how to act. And honestly, I kind of lost my train of thought here, but it's more of they have this idea where they're kind of the center of attention and it's like everything kind of revolves around them, mainly because I've noticed when kids tend to have problematic behavior or they tend to act out in certain ways, they tend to get more attention because that's just how it works. Like if you have a person maybe growing up in a problematic home, they tend to act out just because they want to get that attention. So I feel like because they aren't really being maybe taken care of by their parents, because like parents are also really important in childhood development and whatnot. So I feel like, okay, you're having internet access fully and then you have very little parental supervision, and then now you're also trying to act out so you can be like the center of attention because no one's really telling you not to do that, and now you think it's acceptable. So it's more of now these kids are kind of just navigating their lives saying, okay, well, I'm the center of attention, most of the things revolve around me, and I'm just going to keep going with it. And it's like it's not completely their fault because developmentally that's just how they're kind of thinking of being raised. I mean, they want parental attention, they want people to pay attention to them, and also they want to do all these things, be all these things, be cool, and they're also just not getting enough attention at home, and they're only getting internet access for their I guess for their role models essentially. So I guess for that reason it's more of they're growing up really quick, the internet's not really helping, and everything's kind of just degrading, I guess I would say. But what are your guys' takes on that?
For I was gonna say like egocentrism, which is like what you're referring to, like it's like a natural part of like development, but like you were saying, like there are certain things that kind of make it worse. And I think it's really interesting that you like bring up the internet in relation to that because I feel like that sense, like that sort of like need for virality, like I feel like that's such a big thing within our culture, just like that desire for virality mixed in with the natural aspect of egocentrism, like during development. It's just not really the greatest mixture because I feel like because of TikTok, I feel like that sense of virality feels so much more attainable than it did like a little less than a decade ago. Because back then, like if you went viral, like immediately you would go on Ellen. Like literally no lie. Like you guys know what I'm talking about. Like I don't know if you guys remember like Alex from Target. Like literally he was on Ellen and what like I think that like tweet got like what like a couple 100,000 likes. Now it's like pretty much anyone can get 100K likes on a TikTok video. But the issue that comes with it, because virality is so common now, people are having to go to even greater extremes to feel like they can achieve it because now everybody feels like they have their own niche. So now people are like, okay, well, I need to do something even crazier, even more wild, so that I can like actually like attain that sense of popularity. And I think that mixed in with the egocentrism of development isn't necessarily the healthiest because I feel like people might feel like, I mean, even adults, you see this even with adults, which is crazy, but still, like, I feel like children might be more susceptible to it because of the fact that they're younger. We see people like putting themselves in less than ideal situations just so that they can go viral and just so that they can sort of feed this need for attention. And that's not healthy at all. But like I was saying, I feel like children are more susceptible to it because of that natural egocentrism that you go through for like that developmental period of your life.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say on that too, Emily, is like when we talk about stuff like that, sorry, what kind of comes to mind a little bit is when you say like kids or when we say like children, is there like an age range in mind? Because I remember when I was like a kid in elementary school, we would hear that like during middle school, like once you start puberty, you're gonna start really caring about fitting in a lot more, like a lot more than we cared like when we were like, I guess in elementary school. And I don't know how you guys kind of remember like your childhood experience, like if you remember it being like, oh, in second grade, I like really wanted to fit in at school or anything like that. But genuinely, like from that perspective, I'm curious, do you feel like when we even see the adultification of children, it's kind of like, oh, they're moving at the same rate we used to, and then all of a sudden it's like now third graders are acting like 12-year-olds, or like now like 10-year-olds are like acting like they're 15. Like, do you feel like, or do you feel like this has just been a gradual change? Like at each age level, maybe not like an infant, right? But like at each like year age level, it sort of has like progressed in like how much they've been adultified.
When I
Honestly, oh, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, no, I was gonna say when I say, like, children, what I think of is, like, that 8, 9 to, like, 12 age range, like, that's really what I'm thinking about, or even, like, 13.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like because we have to ask that question, that really brings up like this kind of new phenomenon of like, what exactly do we define kids as nowadays? Because I think when I was like in fourth grade and fifth grade, everyone kind of defined us as kids. And now it's like a lot of people, when they talk about, kids my sister's age or like kids in like sixth grade, seventh grade, they don't really refer to them as kids anymore. They refer to them as teenagers. And I feel like it's progressing like lower and lower and lower. So now it's like fourth graders aren't really, they're like the last thing you would consider a kid, and they're more like tweens. And then now it's like, okay, fifth graders, they're like tweens about to become teens. And it's like by the time you're in sixth grade, you're a teenager. So I feel like I don't know. I guess as Emily was saying, the egocentrism thing, it's like you kind of always want to fit in. You kind of always want to like belong. Because like, humans, they're more of a social species, and for that reason it's like you want to belong so that the group doesn't kick you out. But at the same time, I feel like because we're given internet access and because we're given all of these like new means to get all of this peer pressure, not even from like just our peers but also from other sources as well. And it's, I feel like now it's becoming more focused in younger and younger ranges. So even though biologically or like developmentally it's like not much is changing because it's the egocentrism, it's like getting more uh it's getting more, what's the word for it, like not exposed, exaggerated, I guess you could say, or more like emphasized in like those younger ages.
Well, I'll say I feel like this is interesting because the I thought you were gonna take this the way that like at least for me, like I feel like in my I wouldn't say my time, like we're around similar ages. So like the 1 year or 2 years, I feel like most middle schoolers still get referred to as kids or like viewed as children. And that's like interesting to me. Like I don't even feel like people are like referred to as like teenagers nowadays until high school. Like that's when you start to get treated like a teenager. Because at least to me, and I'm sure, like I remember my sister told me when I was a freshman in high school that she thought that like, oh, like you're still like a baby, like you're still like a freshman. And I was like, shoot, I thought I was like really old now that I'm a freshman and stuff. And we actually like the campus I am at right now, they're bringing middle schoolers on for a summer camp, and I'm seeing them and I'm thinking like these are actually children, like not even in a disrespectful way, but like genuinely like that disparity or like sort of that gap, like that's just interesting to me because I didn't even, so you, just to confirm, I'll be like you feel like even like sixth graders, seventh graders now are sometimes getting viewed as like teenagers, like essentially like 12-year-old, 13-year-olds.
And it's not even like other kids saying it. What I'm saying, like people are viewing these I guess
Yeah.
sixth graders, seventh graders as children. I mean, not children, sorry, tweens. It's the parents. The parents are being like, this is my tween. It's the kids. Like, I see a freshman, I'm a sophomore, and I'm like, you are a little baby. They're Gen Alpha now. Did you guys know that? They're Gen Alpha now. I'm going to school with Gen Alpha kids. Anyway, regardless of that. But it's like the parents are referring to their kids as like ages older. And then the kids are referring to like these like their fellow kids as well, kids. So it's like that's kind of interesting to me how the parents are kind of adultifying their children already, and then like the kids are kind of trying to push them down. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know if it's a phenomena for parents to be more laid back than before, but I feel like at least from my circles, I've noticed that. I mean, like, I don't personally know a lot of people my age who are parents because I'm only 21. So mostly everyone I know is still in college or still in school of some sort. But like, even my older cousins, I've, like, noticed, like, that they're a lot more, like, laid back with their kids and stuff, and I think it's really interesting. I know a few people who are a bit more, like, authoritative with their children, but I feel like, I don't know, at least from what I've seen, like, on the internet, which could be misleading, but then also what I've observed, like, from the few people who I do know that are parents, like, I see them being a lot more laid back with their kids than before and just allowing them to be unrestricted or to sort of act or to be very like passive or permissive with the way that their children act. Like even if they're acting out, they're just kind of like, oh, okay, like whatever. Like they're not necessarily being very like attentive. But I don't know. I don't know what you guys have seen or whether you guys agree with that or not. I don't even know if that's common, but that's just something that I feel like I've been seeing more of.
I noticed that especially in like single parents and like divorced parents, they'll act that way. But like divorced parents, single moms, they won't act that way if they're divorced. Single dads will. And then single parents, if there's like a bereavement in the family, they will act in that like laid back way. And I think maybe it's because like, okay, they're tired or okay, there's like certain extenuating situations that are occurring. Like for people who have like bereavement, it's like, okay, my spouse just died and now I have to raise my kids. So they're kind of dealing with that situation and it's kind of hard for them to take care of their own children because they're just going through their own like hurts and like pains and struggles. Then for like divorced parents, it's kind of like they chose that situation and it's like, yes, they still deal with a bunch of like issues like immigrant divorced people compared to, you know, American, like you're born here, you're raised here, you have like resources that most Americans do. It's like, okay, you're more stable. You are like a little bit more strict, that's just what I've noticed, like talking to my friends and then my own personal experiences. It's kind of like certain people, like with certain backgrounds, are a lot more lenient, but then there's, you know, that few that are like very strict. But Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'll say, like, as an extension of that point, like, I actually do think it kind of turns into this conversation of, like, the culture behind how these kids are raised, because when I mention these things about, like I see some parents still like to call them, like, kids and stuff, I've realized there is probably, like, a cultural disparity there. I think it might be very different between certain cultures. And so, like, I might be just be speaking from personal experience, but at least within, like, South Asian culture, for example, I think they kind of like to, like, I guess, like, focus on this viewpoint that the kid's kind of still a kid and maybe they like to wait a bit longer, and a part of that, I think, is attributed to maybe how, like, the upbringing in those countries is. Like, it's treated a little bit differently, sort of the expectation of responsibilities when it comes to certain things, and that gets into a whole bunch of stuff, like, at what age can you get a driver's license in, like, America versus, like, Europe or things like that. But it's now also choosing, like, how way back I kind of mentioned, like, there's these certain responsibilities that come naturally with age, and then there's certain things you learn through consuming things like the media, which is kind of where this is all getting expedited. I feel like with things like a driver's license, for example, that's where we kind of look at where society decides that like a certain age is like, ready to be an adult in a certain manner. Or even similar to how a lot of things get decided at 18, which on its own little tangent, for example, like I know for one of the things that I'm a part of that I work on, I'm like currently 17. So I still have to sign like a lot of compliance forms, things like that. And it's like in a month, I'm 18 now and I wouldn't have to worry about any of it, or like in a few months, something like that, right? And so it's kind of interesting, I guess, how like we decide where the divide is, or how like stringent and strict we are about the divide between like a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, or like a driver's license and no driver's license. And actually, I think kind of where I want to take that is Emily, I'm curious whenever you looked into like I know you looked into psychology stuff, like you've done some work with psychology, and then you mentioned childhood elementary development. But do they kind of look into like if there's like a biological aspect of like at this age, this is when it's appropriate to give these responsibilities to like a kid?
Um, well, I'm trying to think because I really, really only did 1 semester of early childhood education, not going to lie, so my knowledge is somewhat limited, but I don't really think, from what I remember at least, there's not like a specific cutoff point. It's more so of a range because I think there's also that aspect of having to account for personal circumstance as well because I feel like there is that aspect of there are certain things that are developmentally inappropriate, but I think once you start developing into something that is like appropriate more so there isn't like a specific age, it's more so like a range because I took an adolescent psych class actually like this past semester which is really interesting. And pretty much whenever they talked about, like, teenagers reaching or, like, what is it? Like, reaching a certain level of development or, like, reaching a stage of, like, independence, they never referred to it as a singular age. It was always a range. It was always like, "Oh, 16 to 17, 18 to 19." Like, it was never set. And I think that is pretty accurate because, I mean, like, I was literally 19, like, 2 years ago, and I just feel like especially in late adolescence, there's just such a difference between how people act. Like, truly, you see people who are more, like, codependent on their parents, and then you see people who have been independent for a while, like, even while they were teenagers. Because when I first started college, like, there were people who didn't even know how to do laundry. And then there were people who, like, had been, like, working to, like, try to sustain themselves since they were, like, 15. So it's like you see, like, a really big difference because of personal circumstance, and I feel like there will always be, like, of course, like, levels to, like, maturity, but I feel like there's never gonna be, like, a singular age where it's like, "Oh, this is the age where you can do X, Y, and Z," because I feel like there is always gonna be difference because of circumstance, but there's always gonna be, like, that small range where it's gonna be like, "Oh, between, like, these 3 ages, this is when people become, like, X, Y, and Z, or this is when they reach this stage," because realistically, it's like people will differ a little bit, but there will be that sort of general area where they're going to get to that stage, I feel like. But yeah, that's what I wanted to yeah.
On
Yeah,
the
so go ahead, Ombi, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. On the topic of like personal circumstance, I also wanted to like talk about how certain resources and like schooling and then also like people who have to come from like certain backgrounds like how that impacts it because in the beginning we were talking about internet mainly but it's also like okay what about your income what about like your like how you're raised what household you come from do you come from the streets are you more like wealthy and I noticed that especially here in North Carolina we tend to have like schools that are very low income. Like I live in Wake County and it's like we're really rich here. But it's like you go outside of it, the more rural areas, and it's like they get less funding. They have worser home situations. There's like a lot more happening. And I noticed with kids like that, they tend to grow up extraordinarily quickly. It's insane. Like they're already working like two jobs trying to survive for not survive, trying to provide for their family and then also survive like the debt. They have a lot of debt going on. The education in their schools isn't good enough. A lot of the teachers aren't high quality, so they're receiving like bad education. They're receiving like not enough food on the table. They're not having like enough resources to really provide for themselves. So they have to really grow up in that sense. I feel like before we were kind of just talking about how kids were like growing up in the more, I guess, modern situations, like in the sense of, oh, well, now they're Lulu girls, or like, okay, now they're like on TikTok. But it's like there's also that side where they're like, oh my God, these kids have to really grow up and they have to grow up without all of these resources. And now they have to come and like do all these things, like Emily was saying. So I just found that really interesting because, especially here, there's a lot of kids that go to my school, even though like my school, we're definitely one of the better schools. There's still a lot of kids who, struggle and suffer with those disparities in wealth and also like resources overall. But Josh, as you were saying,
Well, I was just gonna ask then, like, on that note, so do you consider those the same kind of adultification? Like, the, like, Lulu girls versus, like, the kid who's, like, going through, like, that kind of struggle and they develop, like, skills, like, are you putting that all under, like, the same blanket category, you think?
honestly, not really, because it's like I've noticed that with the people who do, have quote, quote unquote Lula girls or whatever, they have the money to support those specific ideals. And it's also, I feel like they tend to be more no hate to them. They're just kids, but it's like they tend to be a little bit more immature and they don't really tend to understand the world in a more greater aspect. And it's not their fault. They're children. They don't need to grow up, They're trying to grow up, trying to act cool, trying to do whatever. But it's like at the end of the day, they're just kids and they don't have the capacity to truly understand all of those things. And they don't have to. They're just kids. But it's like for the kids who are, growing up in those very I wouldn't say broken homes, but in that situation where it's like, oh, they have to do all these things to really just survive and like they can barely even thrive. I feel like they're taking on the aspect of like adultification that is like providing for yourself very young. And it's like they don't get to have a childhood. So it's like I feel like both are tragic in their own way. It's just in very different ways.
So then do you think that, like, I guess in a way then you're making a distinguish or, like, you're distinguishing between maturing early and, like, adultification of childhood. And do you feel like at that point, do you kind of feel like, and this could go for like Emily or Envy, but like, do you feel like maturing early is a good thing or both are just like bad situations? Like neither is good. And if so, like kind of why? Like what do you think? Is there like pros and cons there? Is it like,
I
easy to answer?
I think neither is really ideal because even if you are forced to mature early, it doesn't allow you the space to be a child in the way that children deserve to be children. Because realistically, I genuinely feel like children are entitled to a childhood because you're not equipped with the skills, you haven't been taught them, like, you haven't been equipped with the skills or you're not even developmentally at a point where you can be an adult, where you can fully sustain yourself because even those kids who do mature early, like, even if they just act like as an emotional crutch for their parents or if they're helping financially support their household, I feel like that's not something that's intrinsic for a child, and it almost adds more anxiety on them because sometimes they really just don't understand or not even that they don't understand, but it's just more so, like, it's like the problem the way I'm trying to, like, find the right wording for it. Like, the problem is too big for what they're capable of in that given moment, so then they kind of have to grasp at straws because they're legitimately, like, kind of forced to because of circumstance to be more mature or to be like or to act more as an adult, and that's not inherently healthy either because then later in life they might develop sort of like a I don't want to say like a savior complex, but more so like it sometimes it leaves them with less room for their problems. I've noticed that a lot with children who are forced to mature early where they feel like they can't express themselves or they feel like they always have to be there for other people because of the fact that they had to act like an adult themselves and like they always had to be there for other people when they weren't supposed to be doing that because they were kids basically. I mean, literally, but still nonetheless. Yeah, it's just not an ideal situation in that aspect either. And then of course there's also that aspect of like the Lulu girls, like children who are adultifying not themselves, but are almost being adultified by society and the internet. And they act older because they want to seem cool and not because of like some life circumstance. That also of course isn't healthy. Largely because one, it's like developmentally inappropriate and it can just put them in unsafe situations, realistically, trying to mimic that sense of adulthood that you're just not ready for. But I feel like all around it's not the healthiest because in one situation, on one hand, you're putting a child who isn't an adult in adult situations, and then that leaves them with less room for them to be a child or for them to feel like they can just fully be themselves, which is a child. And then on the other hand, you have children who are trying to look older because it like makes them feel cooler, and that of course isn't healthy because it can put them in bad situations.
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, I would say that it's also a societal thing, as Emily was saying before, but I feel like we very much as a society kind of compliment and really try to push like, "Oh my god, you're so mature for your age," or "Oh my god, you're so intelligent." And it's like, well, they weren't supposed to be. And it's like, I feel like we as a society really value that whole "you're so mature," da 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 da. And I think maybe it's because we're also a capitalistic society where it's like we're depending on these kids to grow up really quickly and to support our economy. So I feel like it started like there, but it's also more of, oh my god, you're so mature. Now these kids think, wow, I'm finally getting validation from people who will actually care about me. I'm finally getting validation from someone who's like older than me or someone who's, more mature than me. And it's like I had to grow up all by myself. And now this one person who is more experienced than me is finally telling me something. So I have to be doing it right. I'm probably doing it right. So then they continue and to perpetuate that cycle of, well, I'm mature. And well, everyone's telling me I'm mature. So that means I have to keep doing this to get love. I have to keep doing this so I can support my family. This is something that is important to me. And it's like, in the process of that, they get more isolated and then they start losing all the friendships they have. And it's like similar to how we were talking about, the egocentrism and then trying to like be isolated in that way. It's like you're also getting isolated in this way. It's like two different types of isolation. Like with that isolation, it's more of you're mentally isolated. But then with the other type of adultification where you have to provide for yourself and like you have to overcome adversity to really become that adult version, it's kind of like you're getting isolated more, I guess, mentally, but in a state where it's like it's a lot harsher, I would say. Only because you're fighting the world, both like with your physical situation, but also your mental situation. Because I noticed that a lot of people who grow up quicker, they can't relate to their peers because they're like leagues above in like a mentality than their peers are. And it's not to say their peers are behind them. It's just they're so extraordinarily ahead for their age that it's unhealthy and that they can't fit in. So now they're hanging out with people who are that age group. And now they're like, okay, I should be doing this and this and this. It's like if I was hanging out with Emily, I love Emily, but it's like, okay, Emily pays taxes. Emily goes to college. Emily has a job. I'm 16 and I'm a high school student, and now I'm hanging out with someone who's telling me, not telling me, but like she has all these things. And I'm thinking, this is the influence I want. So now I'm putting this negative influence on myself. We're like, not because Emily, what she's doing is bad, it's just for me, for my age, I shouldn't be doing that. So I just feel like it's an extraordinarily isolating experience, and it's just being applauded and cheered on by our society, which is making it just a lot worse and more um, aggravated as an issue overall.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, like, the isolation thing, I'm sure that, like, that can probably resonate with, like, a lot of people as well, just, like, their childhood experiences and things of that nature. And so, I kind of had 2 points I wanted to get to off of that, kind of, like, based off 2 different things you had mentioned. So, backtracking a little bit, the first was, the first thing you had mentioned, or both of you guys had mentioned, relating to kind of, like, it's important to preserve the ability to, like, experience this kind of childhood, and I feel like that sentence is even correlated with, like, fitting in your age level, for example, right? Like, that's an example of experiencing that form of childhood. Is I wonder if we demodify, like, this whole idea of, like, adultification, does that actually, I don't wanna say have negative impacts, but it's almost like now we have to choose between them choosing to glorify their childhood or glorify adulthood. And so, like, kind of where that gets me thinking a little bit is, like, I feel like a lot of people live their life in regret too as adults, thinking that their childhood was the best their life was ever gonna be, and now they don't have faith that their life as an adult can be happier or more fulfilling than their life as a child because they're reminiscing about not having responsibilities, not having to like pull into the 9 to 5 each day and things like that. And I also, not to necessarily play devil's advocate, but I also feel like that's unhealthy as well. Like, I feel like it could be healthier if we can constantly kind of view the world as this thing where life continues to get better and better. Not that there's anything wrong with kind of glorifying these elements of childhood that are really precious and important for development and growth. But I didn't know if you guys had any thoughts, like, is there something to be said about it being unhealthy for us to also act like becoming an adult is like this horrible thing because of the kind of impression it puts on people's mind about being scared to like grow up? That could be something to talk about, but also kind of for fun as well as an extension of that. Do you guys ever feel like you were like when you were a kid, you really wanted to like be an adult, or like as you start to become like more like of an adult, you kind of were like, I don't want to become an adult anymore. I kind of wish I could like stay a kid. Like, how did you guys kind of experience those feelings growing up?
When I was oh my god, this is actually so funny because when I was a kid, I literally did not wanna grow up. I was so scared. I was like, "No, I don't even know how to be an adult. Like, what are you talking about? I have to be an adult." And I think also a big fear of mine, I think part of the reason why it was such a big fear is also because, like, my parents, they were immigrants, so they sort of were being adults in this entirely new country. So then I was like, "Oh my god, like, my parents don't know how to be adults here, so how am I gonna be an adult here?" Like, it was like this whole, like, thing. And then even when I was a teenager, I hated getting older. Like, I remember being 16, and I was like, "Oh my god," like, I think every once in a while, I would kind of have this mental thing of, "Okay, how many months until I turn 17? How many months until I turn 18?" Like, I was so scared, and then when I hit 18, I was like, "This is it. Like, this is it. Like, this is the big moment that I've been dreading forever." And I was freaking out because I was like, "Okay, how do I be an adult?" And then it's funny because literally nobody was treating me like an adult. Like, everyone was still treating me like I was a teenager. Same thing when I was 19, and, like, I remember also when I was 18, I think that was the first time somebody called me ma'am at the store, and it freaked me out so bad, and I was like, "No." I was like, "Stop, I'm literally 18 years old." Like, I'm which is, like, funny because I look back now and I'm like, Whatever." Like, I was literally 18, like, I was a teenager, who cares? And yeah, I think it's one of those things where I feel like adulthood gets so antagonized largely because of the societal structure that we have. I think just people feel more so unhappy because we live in a culture where like you live to work, and I think that's also why it gets demonized so much. But Honestly, I feel like with adulthood and just any natural part of life, there are downsides as well as upsides because realistically, as much as childhood does get glorified, you do have a lack of autonomy, which makes sense because of the fact that you're not equipped to take care of yourself. And I mean, like in some way, like I understand that childhood can be why it's glorified because you have that lack of responsibility and you're just sort of like allowed to exist and just be. But realistically, a lot of people have like less than ideal circumstances where they're not with people who make them feel cared for, or like they're just not cared for, period. And so then adulthood almost feels like this because now they feel like they actually have control over their life. And naturally, I feel like every aspect of life has its ups and its downs. Like now that I'm older, like I don't really antagonize adulthood. Like every once in a while I'll see something that will like remind me of like when I was like a teenager and I'm just like, I still feel like a similar person. It's weird. I feel like naturally as you go through life, you just sort of feel like a different version of yourself. Like you feel sort of like a Pokemon where like you're sort of like evolving, but you're still like you still have traits from that like base model, but still you're sort of like evolving and there's like traits to you that are fine-tuned through life experience. And now that I'm a little bit older, I'm like, I feel like this part of my life, like when I was in college, is definitely like the most enjoyable that my life has ever been, which is really unexpected because when I was a teenager, I feel like genuinely I did not get to enjoy it because I was always so petrified of adulthood, which sucks because even then I would try to like tell myself and calm myself down and be like, okay, like I really need to enjoy my life right now because I'm gonna look back and I'm gonna be so upset that I didn't enjoy it because I was always so stressed out about growing up. And now that I'm older, I'm like, yeah, I wish I could, but really I just didn't know how to. But yeah, now when I look back on my teenage years, like the first thing that I think of is how terrified I was of growing up. And now that I'm older, I'm just like, I mean, it's not that bad actually. I was kind of scared for nothing, but
Yeah. No, Emily, I know you were talking about in like previous episodes how like 19-year-old you was like that girl. So like to that point, would you say that you were kind of like growing up, you were like, "Oh my God, I'm so scared of growing up." But then when you kind of like actually hit that mark of like the big 18, you actually got to like live the life that you didn't really get to live in like your childhood? Is that something you would say?
to some extent, yes, because I feel like now that I'm older, I have more like control just in general, like more so of like how I want to live my life, which I mean is natural because when I was a teenager, I had pretty strict parents, so of course like I wasn't really like allowed to just like even like style wise, like there were certain things that I wasn't allowed to do just because I grew up in a very strict and also like religious household. Now that I'm older, like to some extent that still does like impact me because of course I live with my family, but they also do know that I'm an adult at the end of the day. So it's like realistically, I do have more control over the things that I want to do. And even now, I just feel like yeah, I get to live my life a lot more because when I was younger, I was always like, "Oh my God, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but I can't because no one's gonna take me, and then like I don't have money for this, or like da da da, like this, that, and the third, or like my parents aren't gonna want to like pay for this, like because I think I was super into music when I was a teenager, and I wanted to go to so many concerts, and my parents were just like, "No, we're not what like who is this band?" Like my parents were like, "No, who is this band? Who is this musician? Like we're not getting you concert tickets." But now that I'm older, I'm like I can actually like do things that I want to do. Like if like I know like me personally, like I've always been like such a big foodie. Like I know like tomorrow if I wanted to go to like a restaurant in like DC or something, like I could just go and do it. Like really like I could literally just go and do it. And when I was 17, I didn't have that luxury. So yeah, I feel like now I genuinely just feel happier in the sense that I'm like, if I want to do something, I could do it, you know?
Yeah. I think for me growing up, I was more like isolated and like lonely. I didn't have a lot of friends, especially like during COVID. I was just very alone. So for me, I just never really cared about growing up quickly because I was kind of already in that state of mind where it's like, man, what the heck? And I feel like I was also getting really adultified, but like in the way where it's like half the internet because I also had unrestricted internet access. But it's also like, okay, I didn't have any friends, so I kind of had to grow up like on my own, and I didn't have that very good like socialization skills, which is like why now, even though I'm an extrovert, I'm kind of like socially awkward. So I guess I just didn't have like that whole oh my God, I want to grow up so quickly. And I actually don't know a lot of people like my age who really feel that way. There's not many people who are like, oh my God, I want to grow up super quickly now, like that I've talked to in my school or like with my peers and whatnot. They're all kind of just like, I just don't want to turn 18. I just don't want to deal with being 18. And that's like, I think a few people said it was because of the current politics. A few people said it's just because like how terrifying it is, like or like certain things that Emily also stated in hers. But I don't know. I don't feel like a lot of people really want to grow up anymore. But what about you, Josh? How was your childhood?
No, yeah, so I'll say, like, I don't think it was very, linear for me. Like, I feel like it kind of, like I don't know if, like, Emily, like, if you were always, like, a little worried about that, like, fabled 18th birthday or whatever, but, like, that day coming, but for me, it changed a lot. Like, I remember, at some point when I was a kid, like, I really enjoyed it, and I think up until and I was so excited about the thought of being an adult, though, just because I wanted freedoms, which I think is relatable for a lot of kids. Like, when I was, like, in 2nd grade, I was thinking, "I wish I could drive a car." Like, I could take myself places. Like, I was really thinking those things. And so, I think it was up until, like, 7th grade, I kinda lived with this philosophy of, like, I'm just gonna enjoy this because I know once I become an adult, there's gonna be so much work. I mean, back then, I was thinking it was like the SAT. I was like, one day, things are gonna be really bad, I'm gonna have to stay for the SAT, so until then, I'm just gonna enjoy life and hang out with friends and stuff. And then kinda what, like, I guess started to happen, like, 8th, ninth grade is I had this realization that, like, I kind of thought becoming an adult just happened on its own. Like, I think that's very, like, I think that'd be, like, relatable for people in a sense. Like, I just assumed that 5 years from now when I'm, like, 18, at least for me, I'll just be an adult. Like, I just assumed it would happen naturally on its own. And then I think it's around that time you start to realize that there's actually this huge disparity. Like, you have to make a conscious choice to learn how to do certain things, to learn how to live independently. If anything, it just happens naturally because of, like, societal structure. Like, if we all start going to college, like we say at 18, you get to go to college and start living on your own. So naturally, you'll sort of get those adult skills. But like at 16, you could also be living on your own and you'd kind of gain those sort of skills that would be like useful as an adult. And so from my perspective, once I realized that, I became like almost more obsessed with like preparing so that I'm like an adult in time. And I wouldn't say I necessarily feel that way now, but, like, I would just say to an extent, I really do feel like it's been variable for me, but I try to approach things with a mindset of, like, I really wanna make decisions that make me feel like next year, I think life is better than it was the previous year, and a part of that for me is kind of having this belief, like, fundamentally that adulthood is, like does not have to be anything that important, nor does it have to be a bad thing. Like, you can learn to continuously enjoy more and more even as you have to pick up greater and greater responsibilities. Because I do feel like responsibility is probably the biggest difference, right? Like when people kind of refer to like reminiscing on enjoying childhood, a big element of that is we didn't have responsibilities. But I also look back and I think like I used to get sick a lot more when I was a kid. Like there were a lot of things I'd get emotional about that you wouldn't get emotional about now. And it creates like this interesting dynamic of like the highs when I was a kid were like really high, like really exciting. And that's all your brain selectively remembers. But like when things were like rough as a kid, that same like emotionalness and sensitivity really made things kind of like suck a lot too. And you just don't remember that when you look back on it. So I feel like at least for me, from my experience, I tend to be a believer that like I think childhood is really important and it's really awesome to build those memories. So I'm like a firm believer that every kid should be deserved to be raised to have like an enjoyable childhood where they can be absolved of certain responsibilities and things like that. But I've never, like, felt 100% like it has to be worse than adulthood, because the responsibilities adulthood brings comes with the freedom to not have to be so reactive. Like, as a kid being having to just be reactive to the things that are happening around you and sort of experience them based off of what other people say you have to experience in that moment or other things. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on, like, why do you kind of think maybe childhood does feel more exciting? Because people talk about that, like, feeling more present in the moment, like, when you're a kid compared to now and things like that.
I think the sort of emotional reactivity from childhood comes from the fact that you're taking on emotions that like are almost like the way that I conceptualize it as like too big for your body. Like that's how I always see it. Cause like I feel like that's the biggest reason why toddlers or really young elementary age children throw tantrums or like cry very easily because of the fact that you're sort of experiencing these emotions like sadness or like anger or excitement, and because of how, like, young you are, like, they're so overwhelming for you because you don't really know how to process them all of the time, and you don't always necessarily know how to utilize them and react. Like, those are skills that you develop with age, and when you're a kid, like, you're just feeling them. Like, you don't know what to do with them. Like, they're there and you're just like, "Okay, I don't." So a lot of kids, like, they'll just resort to, like, crying or, like, throwing tantrums, and of course, it's up to parents and caregivers to equip kids with, like, the coping mechanisms to, like, work with those emotions in a healthy and, like, productive way. But like, I think that's why I think that's, like, the main reason why, like, in childhood, you feel more excited about things, or, like, when you do feel bad, like, you feel really, really bad. Because I remember, like, as a kid, like, crying about really random things. Like, I think my mom, like, I forgot what happened, like, I think she told me that she lost her sunglasses one time, and I just started crying because I was like, "Oh my god, like, she lost her like, what are we going to do? Like, she lost her sunglass." Like, and I was, like, 3, and it's, like, I don't know why I remember that so vividly and just, like, freaking out about it, but that's what I mean, like, in childhood, like, everything feels legitimately like everything, and when you get older, like, you're just kind of like, "Okay," like, you're more, like, not necessarily passive, but you know how to react because you have years of experience of dealing with certain emotions.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like a lack of experience, as Emily just said. Like, you don't have many experiences to build upon. So, like, all of these emotions are really new. And it's like all of these experiences are super new. Like, this is a really random example, but it's like, why do kids get like lost in targets? It's because they don't know what a target is. And they just like, they're like wandering, they're trying to explore and everything like that. And then they just get continuously lost. It's because like they don't have the experience of like navigation, or they don't like understand how to get through certain things. So because of that, it's like, oh yeah, they're no wonder they're lost. They don't know anything about like the situation they're in. And I kind of just use that as an analogy to be like, they don't know how to not get lost. They need someone to guide them. And it's like, you can't really guide someone's emotions. Emotions are something that you know, yourself feels. So it's like parents can't really, help. They can foster and like help your emotions, but at the end of the day, your emotions are very much just a you thing for you to process. So I don't know. I remember my childhood, like the earlier stages being very vibrant, and like I was on an LSD trip. I've never done LSD. I don't know what that feels like, but it's what I assume an LSD trip feels like. But it's like everything was colorful, everything was loud, everything was like neon colors, and then everything was painted pink, and it was just all super out there. And it's because I didn't really have anything to base it off of. I didn't get to get like that exposure and then get desensitized to all of those things. They were just all big and loud and just crazy. So I feel like childhood felt a lot cooler, just because I got to experience all those things for the first time. And it's like when you experience something for the first time, it's a lot more like, oh my gosh, than when you experience it for like the second or like, third time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure exploration is like a huge aspect of that. And I know they even talk about like statistics, or not statistics, but like this sort of study that the brain processes things like a lot slower when it's exposed to new things, which is why childhood feels like a lot longer. And then as we grow up, it starts to feel shorter. But circling all the way back around to what we were talking about with like the adultification of children, right? Like with things like the internet and things like that. I feel like all of this kind of converges into like a question, I guess, of are those experiences of, like, exploration and things like that that kind of make childhood feel meaningful, are they being deprived of that because 'cause they're being exposed to these, like, adult concepts? Or does it just kinda merge into, like, I guess, like, the explorer exploration in certain aspects? I mean, I'm really guilty, I feel like, of being so accustomed and, like, acclimated to the way my life is, like, with at whatever age I am, that I almost don't even think it's that abnormal because I can't even remember what it's like to be that age. It's like I have to take a second to think, "What was I like at that age?" And then I'm like, "Oh, shoot, that's actually crazy that, like, the kids at this age level are doing those kinds of things." But, even in, like, 6th, 7th grade, I feel like I noticed, like, similar trends even compared to what's kind of happening now. And I guess, like, my final remark on that note is I don't know if in the future things are just gonna get faster and faster and faster, and we're gonna have, like, 5-year-olds, like, on Lululemon, or if it's gonna be, like, this, like, sort of gradual, like, slow thing or reverses or anything like that. But that's all my, like, final thoughts on it.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move into like the media segment, Emily, is there anything that you would like to say on this topic?
I think Josh brings up a very interesting point, saying, wondering what direction we'll go towards in the future. I think it's really interesting because I feel like with people, there's just this huge. I feel like people are very polarizing in the sense of like when they go with something, they fully commit to it, or when they get sick of something, they run in the opposite direction. So I feel like Josh was saying, we're definitely gonna see one of two. It's either gonna be like worsening or we're gonna see a complete opposite of it. which I think is going to be very interesting and only time will tell. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode since it's 7. But
Oh, oh no, we don't
yeah,
have enough time for the media segment then. Well, we'll do that next episode, guys.
yeah.
So stay tuned for that. Anything anyone would like to say before we end the episode?
I just want to say I had like a lot of fun. Like it was really fun being back on. It feels just like it was like kind of a year ago now, which is crazy to me that it's been, I think, literally like a year since the last one I did. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the topic too. I think it was really awesome. So thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Through Their Eyes, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.